Well, Luton Hoo makes a superb location for us and also gives you the opportunity to enjoy the myriad colours of the Antiques Roadshow on a fine day like today. Also, we're not only using the house, as you can see, but also the gardens on the south face of the mansion. So, let's now join our experts with the people of Bedfordshire.
Now, this is Captain Edward Cook. His voyage to the South Sea and round the world performed in the years 1708, 1709, 10 and 11. Now, the interesting thing about this voyage, one of the few circumnavigations at this date, was that if you look at the bottom here, wherein an account is given of Mr. Alexander Selkirk, his manner of living and taming of some wild beasts during the 4 years and 4 months he lived upon an uninhabited island of Juan Fernandez. Now, this particular account of Alexander Selkirk gave somebody else back in England, Daniel Defoe, the idea for his Robinson Crusoe. This chap, Alexander Selkirk, was the original Robinson Crusoe. So this was printed in 1712, and I think Robinson Crusoe came out in 1719 or something like that, so he had a few years to write it. It's not in terribly good condition, but it does show some very interesting points. It shows their route all the way around the world. They came down from England, down to the South Atlantic, down here, round the bottom of Tierra del Fuego, up the side of America, to California. California at this stage is still shown as an island. Nobody had gone round the top and actually shown that, in fact, this bit was attached to that bit. Anyway, from the bottom of California, they made a quick shoot straight across the Pacific, going straight through to the East Indies, Madagascar, Cape of Good Hope, and home. Now, this map is, in fact, complete. It does need restoring, laying down together, but it is all there, so that's one major important thing when one's looking at a book like this. The other thing is to look at the rest of the book and see what it's like. It's very, very worn here. This is damp staining, I think, or this damp mould. Not terribly good condition there, but all this can be restored, and quite easily, I think. Where did you get this? Why is it in such bad condition? What have you done with it? I mean, it's such a super book, and I mean, a wonderful thing.
The story is, my husband's boss lived in some cottages, and they decided they want to pull them down, so they pulled them down to build a new house, and then in the rubble, underneath everything, lots of things, and included was the book. So they didn't buy it; they just found it.
Now, isn't this is amazing? This shows you how good 18th century binding and paper really is. Well, the book that actually made Defoe write Robinson Crusoe in this condition, I would have to say it's worth £300 to £400.
Oh, that's super.
Jolly good. Thank you for bringing it in.
Thank you.
Well, the popular name for these, of course, is the Wellington chest. Yes. Something of a misnomer. I don't think Wellington introduced it at all, actually. It's actually a semainier chest, a French idea where you had 7 drawers for fresh linen each day of the week. And no doubt during the campaigns he discovered this and brought it back to England. So the story goes, anyway. Nevertheless, Wellington chest is what it's called. And it's a jolly good example. And they're nearly always walnut or rosewood. This case is a walnut, a nice burr veneer running down the front. Good quality. Always leaf capped at the top here. The earliest ones are about 1825, 1830. They don't appear much before that. And they were very popular, and they were made right up until the 1880s, 1890s. This one, bang smack in the middle, I'd say about 1850, really.
Oh, right.
How did you come by it? Is it a family piece, or?
Yes, it's a family piece. It belonged to an aunt who inherited it from her great-grandmother. And when she moved, she couldn't accommodate it, so we bought it off of her.
The nice thing about them always is this sort of unique lock here. That has to open before you can open any of the drawers. Big panic in our house when somebody lost the key.
Oh, dear.
You can't get anything. And they are usually plain drawers, and the reason why I wanted to look at this one is because it does have something special, which is this, which lifts it out of the ordinary to the quite exceptional. It turns it into a little gentleman's dressing chest. Very, very unusual to find a nice little secretaire fall like this. It's also a nice feature that these are self-supporting hinges rather than the rather more ugly quadrants that you see sometimes on the bigger pieces. Very smart, beautiful quality brass work on here. Little bare maple drawers, nice little shaping here. I wonder how much you paid for it. You bought it, you say, you had to buy it in the family.
I bought it in the family, yes. I paid £200 for it.
Did you? Did you?
So it was about 8 years ago.
Well, you did all right. I mean, you'll still be friends with the family when I tell them that it's probably worth 1,800 to 2,000 today. Oh. The ordinary ones make about 12 to 1,500. The draw, as I say, makes it a bit special. Jolly nice one. Very good. Well done.
Thank you.
Do you know what it is? What would you do with that?
Absolutely no idea. It was a gift from my grandmother, but I don't know quite where it originated from.
I've got a piece of paper. One always loves pieces of paper because they're always wrong. It says on it, I got at Rye. This, or something like that, is Sèvres Royal Period, 1753. This is actually a custard cup. You actually ate custard with a spoon out of it. Because in the 18th century, custard was perhaps more like we would call crème brûlée. I mean, it was a sweet
Special.
thing. Yeah. Not as we know custard today. And it certainly appears to be Sèvres. We've got on the bottom here the Sèvres mark, which is the interlaced L's of the Louis. Right. Louis XV set the factory up, and then it passed to Louis XVI before the Revolution. It was founded actually at a disused chateau called Vincennes, and it was founded about 1745. And then in 1753, they introduced a date coding system, and they put a little letter A in the middle of the letters. So A was 53, B 54, C 55, and so on. So we can date every piece of Sèvres porcelain accurately. Now, it was a royal factory. It had tremendous prestige. Sèvres was always collected by the English. I mean, the Prince of Wales, Prinny as he was called, later George IV, terrible man. He was a great collector of it, and the Queen's got a wonderful collection of Sèvres porcelain. So it was always highly regarded. And if something is highly regarded, somebody else is going to come along and start making it. And this is French, yes, but it's nothing to do with Sèvres. It was made in Paris, probably in the 1920s to 1930s.
Really?
So it is actually a forgery.
Right.
The pattern is close to a Sèvres one, but the quality of the workmanship is not good enough, but pretty enough, and worth about 30 to 40 pounds.
Quite a story to it.
Good story to it. I like the bit of paper particularly, even though it's wrong. And finally, this teapot. This we call Mandarin palette, with this particular purpley pink to it. This was an export ware teapot made for consumption in Europe and sent over from China. And it's really a rather wonderful piece of workmanship. The painting is very good indeed. So is the gilding. The crab stock handle is quite typical, and spout. And would you have known that it was Chinese?
I did wonder, but I wasn't certain.
Right.
Yes.
There's actually a rather good way of telling whether you're dealing with a Chinese teapot or a Japanese teapot, and that's to look underneath the handle. You see that hole?
Yes.
Chinese teapots are hollow, and the hole is to let the air out when it's being fired. And you don't find that on Japanese teapots, and almost never on European ones either.
Once upon a time, was it actually made for
use?
For use.
This would have come across from China with an entire service of milk jugs, sucre, possibly even a tea caddy, and it's unusual for it to have survived. Date about 1760.
As old as that?
Yes, as old as that. Nice thing. Given there's a bit of damage to it, that's going to be worth around 150 to 200 pounds.
Goodness me.
All right?
Thank you very much.
Thanks for bringing it in.
One snake.
Oh my God. I think it's one of the most unpleasant things I've ever seen on the road. How did you get it?
Well, my father was in Palestine during the Great War, and his unit left Palestine in either 1919 or early 1920. And this snake was in the raffle, and he won the raffle on the night that they left.
He must have been, his emotions must have been mixed. I think he A, won the raffle, and B, this is what he got for it.
Yes.
You've obviously got one or two condition problems with it. It seems to have bitten the head off its lizard, which is unfortunate. The value of it is difficult, because there's a limited number of households who wish to have one of these on their sideboard.
Well, I hope it's snaky.
I would think that if he came up in an auction, as an amusing novelty more than an antique, he was going to be worth somewhere around about £200 or £300. Oh yes, I mean a lot of handwork's gone into this. Big effort. So I think you're going to have to start being much more polite about it.
Yes.
You're going to have it back on the sideboard.
Yes.
And bad news is you're going to have to reattach the head of the lizard.
Yes, I'm going to have to work on him properly this time, not just cobble him up.
Quite an extraordinary pile of drawings, these. They're rather good. Where did you get them?
I rescued them from a demolition man's bonfire, actually.
Did you?
About 20 years ago, yeah.
They were just clearing a house.
Clearing a house, and
them on.
yeah, they would have been chucked. Yeah.
The interesting thing is that normally when you see great piles of works, they're not very good, but these are really marvellous, I think. Well, I expect you're wondering what you can do with them.
Don't know what to do with them. Well, what I'd like, I'd like the artist to get some kind of recognition, really, because...
well, he's called Hope Reed, and there's a little, I mean, he did exhibit a little bit, but I think what I would recommend is to find a small dealer who will put together an excellent exhibition, price them right, in other words, not too high, and I'm sure that they'd sell like hotcakes because they're marvellous.
There's no good me keeping them forever, is there? I've got about 10 on my wall now, so giving a few away. And
well, actually, they're jolly nice presents, aren't they?
Yeah, they've done well for wedding presents.
Well, I've had it since about 1930.
Right.
Matter of fact, an ex-boyfriend bought it for me.
Good heavens. Why did you become an ex-boyfriend?
Well, because I finished with him.
Oh dear. But
Then my husband.
but you kept the Clarice clip.
Well, he didn't want it back, so I kept it.
So you had these effectively from new.
Yes.
Clarice Cliff, of course, was one of the great designers of the 1930s. She started in 1929, and during the 30s, these bizarre and fantastic patterns were increasingly popular. I think because they captured the spirit of the age. These are very successful patterns. The crocus pattern, I think you know as well,
yes,
which is the most popular. But these pieces with their bright oranges, their bright greens, were absolutely the most typical of her work. And of course, this rather fantasy landscape that was very characteristic of the style, with the path going through the trees, these fantastic sort of balloon trees. Nothing could be more Clarence Cliff-like than this. Now, of course, Clarence Cliff today, I'm sure you're aware, is very desirable. Do you remember what they cost when he bought them for you?
Nothing at all. No,
shillings, presumably. A jar like this, though, you would be probably thinking about £500–600. Obviously, with the lid damaged, the value is less. We're talking probably about £300 or £400. A single plate like this fetches now £150 up to £200. So your inheritance, if that's the word for it, has done you proud. Even though the relationship that encouraged it at the time has...
I'd have to let him know about them.
No, I think you better keep it a secret in case he asks for them back after all these years.
Yes.
Wow, look at that. Fantastic. Very early post-war television set. Which one of you is the owner?
Well, my uncle gave it to me, and I've been looking after it since then.
So you were the original purchaser, were you? Well, now tell me, when did you buy it?
I bought it at Tottenham Court Road. I bought it for my parents. And
when was it? It must have been, what, 1946, 47?
46. And it was the original Logie Bear, and Jack Buchanan at the time was the director.
That's right. Jack Buchanan and John Logie Baird were great friends, and they set up this company just after the war, and they produced 4 wonderful television sets, and they were called the Adelphi, the Lyric, which is what this is, the Grosvenor, and the Athena, I think it was. This, in television collectors' terms, is thought to be the best of them all, because not only was it technically very good, but also artistically, stylistically, it was very advanced and a beautiful object to look at. And they were very expensive. Now, I know that in some shops, the Lyric was retailed at about £235. Now, what was the price of a car then?
£100 or under.
So it was the price of 2.5 saloon cars. You were a very good son, weren't you?
Yes.
Amazing. The history, really, of television is quite remarkable in England, because in 1936 it was the first domestic service anywhere in the world. And it was only for a few people. I mean, Alexandra Palace, although it had a catchment area, if you like, of about 2,000 square miles, very, very few people could afford to buy a television set. And it stopped, broadcasting stopped obviously in 1939, and in 1946 up it started again. And that's when John Logie Baird and Jack Buchanan produced these wonderful sets. And in 1948, they started another broadcasting station in Sutton Coldfield, just in time for the Olympic Games. And that's really when television set ownership became much more popular. This was still from the period when it was very much a luxury item. Now, did your parents know anybody else who had one?
No.
I'm sure in their area it must have been...
In that area, I think we were the only one.
One
popular house in the street.
I'm sure you could charge everybody for entry. But what I'd like to do, if I may, is to turn it round and just have a look at the bag, because that will tell us a little bit more about it. There we go. The John Logie Baird Limited name tag on there. Now, I'm pleased to see it's unplugged, so I'm going to risk taking the back off. Let's just have a look in there. Oh, look at this. This is wonderful.
It hasn't been cleaned.
Can you turn this back so that it's...
I dropped that.
That's it. Look at this sort of wonderful build-up of 1940s dust.
We dare not touch it.
Is it working? Have you tried it?
The tube is live. I've turned it on once, but I was advised not to do it because it could blow it.
Yes.
It isn't working because I haven't replaced the valves.
Well, wonderful to see the inside there. This is undoubtedly a Rolls-Royce. However, because more and more were made of them, it means that the originals haven't really kept pace with inflation. So it's not going to be worth the price of two family saloons, I'm afraid, but it is worth something. And I would have thought we're talking about perhaps between £2.5 and maybe as much as £5,000. I know that's a very big gap, but collectors are few and far between, and the interest is really only just growing. And I'm very pleased that you brought it. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I purchased it years ago in the sale.
Just because you liked it?
Well, yeah.
It's quite a strange, rather pretty family group, but there is a cautionary tale which I wish to tell about the artist. His name is Edward George Handel Lucas. His father was a poor tailor in Croydon. At age 17, the young Lucas exhibited an extraordinary still life at the Royal Academy and became a celebrated artist in Croydon. However, it all did not go too well, because to do a picture this size in the 1870s, he took up to 16 months. So immaculately did he paint it. And because of this, he soon went broke. He got to a stage where he couldn't pay his rent. So he owed the landlady £60, and he had a family to support. And so he said, I'll paint you a picture. But it took him so long to paint the picture, the landlady couldn't wait and evicted them. So it's a really sad story because he's a beautiful artist. Now, this picture, in fact, is dated 1930, which again is very interesting because here he is 60 years old, but he'd long before given up painting. So I imagine that there can only be two reasons for this picture. Either he was broke again and desperate to make some money, or I think much more likely, I'm sure, that this is one of his daughters and family. And you can see how the young Handel Lucas was influenced by the Pre-Raphaelites, by these pure glazes on a white ground. I don't think it's a very expensive picture, £800 to £1,200, something like that. But you can see in the details the young Handel Lucas recreated age 60. And I think it's a beautiful work.
Is this something you bought, or where did they come from?
No, my aunt had got them stored in a coal shed, and I begged them from her, and she kindly gave them to me. They are, in fact, the library steps from Langleybury House.
Oh, it's just up the road here.
That's right, in West Hertfordshire, actually.
They are absolutely magnificent. The thing is about these, they have been so widely reproduced recently that when you see them coming in today, you think, can they really be the genuine article? They are made of beech, and if you look at the varnish on them, it's gone all crackly, and of course that couldn't possibly be reproduced. Do you use them? Have you got a marvellous library that you stand them up and climb up and look at your books?
I would like to think so, but I really don't have it used like that. In fact, most people think it's a soil pipe on the wall in the house.
Why? Where do you have them?
On the landing.
On the landing?
It's the only part of the house tall enough to put it in.
Oh, but that's such a shame. You should use them. They are so lovely. And they, of course, I mean, they are highly collectible. The fact that they close up so neatly. And if I told you they were worth about £2,500?
I'd be amazed.
Well, that's what they would cost you if you wanted to go and try and buy some. And in fact, if they were mahogany, they would cost even more.
Well, the nice thing is she's got these marvellous eyes that you look at the wax doll eyes and they're always beautifully done with the pupils and everything all delineated. It's lovely. Yes, absolutely. It's sort of slightly creepy, but she is just in very bad shape. The trouble is with wax dolls tend not to make the same sort of money as porcelain-headed dolls. And the moment you have damage on a wax doll, it wipes out the value even further. There is a doll's hospital that you can send them to get them. What they do is they remelt them and join them back together so that you won't even be able to see any damage on it at all. And I really think it's worth doing because she's wonderful. She's got all her original clothes. It just seems such a shame, really, to have something that's in that sort of condition. Is the other one the same?
This one is a younger one, a German one, I think. But what happened was the mildew got its fate.
The mildew got her feet? Ghastly fate. God, it has to.
I know, it's terrible. This is how I was given it. And I had to wash all the clothes and everything.
It's the most advanced case of athlete's foot I've ever seen. Dearie me. Well, what's happened is it's just that the glue's come undone, hasn't it? I mean, the joints have just completely come apart. Now, in perfect condition, she would be worth somewhere around about £475. So the answer is yes, it's definitely worth getting her feet put back on.
There's a fascinating collection that you've got here, but how did you get it together?
My husband's grandfather collected them when he was librarian and curator in Blackburn Museum.
Right. It really does show beautifully, in a sense, what a museum curator really would do, which shows the whole development of the spoon. Because what we do is go from the early English form here, which is a type that you get from about 1300 through to the mid-17th century. This one actually early 17th century. Sadly, though, that one not in good condition. I mean, had that one been a decent spoon, then we'd be looking at maybe £500. As it is, 100, 120 is about it. But then radical change in the second half of the 17th century, and we get the spoon changing to what is much more familiar type. It starts with the trefid, as we see here. It's called that actually because of the two cuts there. If you notice, the initials are on the back.
Yes.
Because all of these spoons, from about 1660 through to about 1760, were set that, the way I've put them on the table here, that's the way they went on the table. Then, from the trefid, they stop cutting the notches, and you get this wavy end. And that is very much the spoon of the reign of Queen Anne. And they're known as wavy end, shield end, or most often dog nose. But then, about 1720, they rounded off the end, so you get to the Hanoverian. And that rounded off end continues through to 1760. But the rat tail that we saw there, that continues up to 1730. Then the rat tail disappears.
That's right, yes.
And you get this little drop. And sometimes, as we've got there, a double drop. And also, because they'd lost the rat tail, they started to decorate the back, so you get the shell backs. Value-wise, for rat tails in good condition, about £50, £60. Without the rat tails, they're going to be more the sort of £40, £50 bracket. The shell backs, those go up again because people do collect those specifically. Maybe £120, £150 for the pair. But notice the important difference, how we go from that one that way and this one turning up. And that happened in 1760. And from there on, spoons, nearly all spoons turn that way. I'm so pleased that you brought it in because it's particularly from 1660 through to 1760. It shows marvellously the development of the spoon over that 100-year span.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
One of the things you discover about beautiful country houses like this is that not everything is quite what it seems. Take these 5 clocks, for instance. Each one of them magnificent, and they would grace any country house such as this. But Simon, I gather they're rather more beautiful than they are practical.
Yes,
I wouldn't want to denigrate their timekeeping abilities, but certainly the reason that they're here is for their looks and for their decorative qualities. Well, starting at the end, this wonderful clock. This is a very famous clock. It's in all books and illustrated. It's what's known as one of the Orpheus series of clocks. It's actually got an astrolabe on the top here. It's supposed to be able to tell you the position of the stars at any time of the year, but you'd be very lucky if you could get it to keep time within, say, half an hour to an hour a day. But its case is absolutely magnificent. It actually tells the story of Orpheus, who was able to charm the animals. And it's late 16th century, 1570, 1580, and of course you're looking at animals as the engraver would have seen them from engravings. Nobody had seen an elephant at that time, and this is made in Germany.
It is a sensational piece,
wonderful clock.
Whether it kept time or not.
And then next to it is another clock of the same period, tremendously powerful. It's wonderful engraving and chasing. And here you can see that 150 years after it was made, which again is the end of the 16th century, they've tried to improve its timekeeping abilities by fitting a pendulum, which when you stand and look at it, you can realize it sort of chops the whole clock about. It was an attempt to improve timekeeping. This, of course, is exactly where it should be. This lives here. It's a magnificent French clock from the middle of the 18th century, made by the royal clockmaker Robert. It probably had a pair of urns or something beside it. And then finally...
Well, these two, I think, are really something quite special, aren't they? They're from the Fabergé collection here at Luton Hoo, and of course the Wernher family were directly connected with the great Russian family, and a lot of the collection came directly from Fabergé's workshop.
Yes, and Luton Hoo is famous for its collection of Fabergé. Here we have pictures of the royal, the family there of Russia, the Tsar, and these were given out almost like spaghetti. If you look in Fabergé's workshop books, it's the Duchess of this, the Tsar of that, and there's hundreds and hundreds. Easter was the great time of year, eggs and these beautiful clocks, which I think there's probably half a dozen or more here.
And this one, a poignant reminder of the fact that, of course, they were all shot.
Yes.
Where do you think this might have been made?
I think China.
You think China?
Yes.
Okay. Has anybody told you anything about it?
My friend who I bought it off of, she told me it was Victorian, and another man told me it could be Chinese Edwardian.
You bought it off a friend?
Yes.
How long ago?
About 3 years ago. It was handed down to her from her grandmother, and she didn't like it. And I said to her, when you want to sell it, I said, can I, I'd like it. And she had someone in to value it, and they said it cost too much to get it restored.
Do you know how much it was going to cost to restore?
He said he'd be about £600 to restore it.
Wow.
And he wasn't really interested in it. He said he'd give her about £250 for it. So she said I could have it for £50.
Generous.
Yes, and so we paid, I think it was about £150 to get it restored to like this, and he told us it could be worth something.
Something?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's try and get it sorted out. The panels are Japanese, and it's quite nice. They've used different kinds of lacquered background to do each different one, which is just sort of showing off their techniques. This is, again, these are rather more unusual as well, because they've built up relief for this pine tree rather cleverly. But my feeling is that these have all come from a screen. They were not mounted in a piece of furniture when they were made, and these were done at the end of the last century, beginning of this, about 1900. Either the screen fell apart, or it was too big, or they didn't like it, or whatever, and rather than chuck the panels away, which would have been a shame, they built a cabinet round it.
Around the panels, yeah.
And the cabinet was built in this country in about 1930. And the clues, I mean, they've got this sort of asymmetrical layout, which you would expect from a Japanese thing. And this, of course, is more Chinese than Japanese. And this kind of angular key fretting and this sort of Art Deco radio design dates it quite easily to the 1930s. The clue to the fact that it's probably English is that. That's an English lock and has in fact got English writing on it, stamped into it. It's in pretty good condition. I think if this were to appear at auction, in perhaps a country auction, it would probably make somewhere around £400 to £600, something like that. But it's a wonderful muddle.
Yeah,
that's the best thing about it.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Now, before we start anything, tell me, has this been deactivated?
Yes.
And have you got a piece of paper to prove it?
Yeah,
Excellent. Secondly, are the cartridges that are in this belt that are about to be pulled into the breech, are they dummies?
Yes, they are.
Splendid, right. This is a Vickers medium machine gun, the sort of weapon that was used for infantry support from the late 1890s until, amazingly, 1962. We plonk the sight up, you can see on the back of it, it goes out to 2,900 yards, which is, you know, quite a good way away. But mostly they were used up to ranges of about 1,000 yards for actually engaging direct targets like a line of attacking infantry. And the concept of a machine gun that one man could carry about really didn't come in until the end of the First World War. It's a lovely gun in beautiful condition, and presumably it must have cost you a pretty penny.
Yeah.
What did you pay for it?
490.
Well, that's the going rate for them at the moment, and bearing in mind that there are no more being made, at some stage they're going to start to go up in value, and that they're an amazingly good piece to sort of form a collection around. If you have a gun room and you have that smack in the middle of it, it really gets people's attention. You must have a very large bedroom.
Yes, sort of stuck in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So it takes up part of it.
Well, it was painted by my great-uncle by marriage. He married my grandmother's sister, and his name was Philip de Laszlo. He was a Hungarian, and he painted this picture of his wife and gave it to my grandmother as a present.
Yes, it's inscribed here. Now, that is your grandmother's name, is that right?
Yes, her name was Constance, and he referred to her as Connolly.
Connolly, from Philip, and I think the date here is 1901. And as you said, he was born in Budapest and trained in Budapest and also in Paris and Munich, and then came and settled in London in the early years, and became one of the most successful of the society portrait painters. I think it wasn't just his painting, but also his personality, which brought the whole thing off so very well. It's particularly appropriate that we have a de Laszlo portrait brought to the show here, because in this house, and in fact this very room, we have a wonderful full-length portrait of Lady Wernher, who was the former owner of the house. Now, I think what's particularly nice about this small portrait is that it is actually unfinished. He's concentrated in oil just on the profile and the hair, and just sketched in the hat here and the shoulders. I mean, some artists would probably go there and they might make a preparatory drawing in black lead and then even draw on chalk onto the board, but he's just gone straight to the canvas, kind of uninhibited, and just painted what he saw. And of course, this was his great skill. On the question of value, I think it's particularly important being the artist's wife, and perhaps if it was of an unknown, I don't think it would be particularly valuable, shall we say, some £1,500 to £2,000. But because it's the artist's wife, I think we can put that figure considerably higher, and probably say between £4,000 and £5,000. Does that surprise you, or perhaps it doesn't?
It does surprise me slightly, but I suppose because it is of his wife, it's more important.
It makes all the difference.
Yes.
Yes.
They are Chinese blue-mite plates, obviously, in the second half of the 18th century. And the quality of the painting is extremely good. It's very fine, isn't it, you see?
Yes.
It's wonderfully drawn. Most people have a pair of plates or one dish or something. How did you get to the quantity?
My parents were very fortunate. Lord Thynne used to own the big house in the village they lived in.
Which was where?
Which was Haynes in Bedfordshire. And shortly before the war, I think the lady that owned the home, who was an ex-relative of the Thynnes, died, and her estate was put in abeyance during the war, and then after the war the house and total contents was put up for auction, and they went to view it, and my father put in a bid before the auction took place for the complete contents.
What was the name of the house again?
It was the old house.
Right.
I think it was called Crothwaite in those days.
The only reason I know about Thynne is that there was a wonderful service made during the first period, Worcester period, Dr. Wall, so-called Dr. Wall period, a service which is known as the, it's called the Lord Henry Thynne service. And it's beautifully painted with wonderful landscapes, all different.
Oh.
And they're very sought after and very, very expensive indeed. Anyway, come to the pieces themselves, discarding that because that we know is a part of another service. This, of course, is a strainer which goes with this meat dish. I can do it like so. The condition, according to your list, is also extremely good. You say 34 dinner plates, and you say 3 damaged.
Yes.
So you've got...
Quite a few.
So you've got 31 mint plate. And if each plate, say, is worth, like that, is worth, I don't know, 60 to 100 pounds, let's say a mean figure of 70 pounds, you're going to add the figures up. So you had 31 dinner plates of this in good condition. You had 19 soup plates, 3 oval platters, 18.5 inches, 3 more oval platters. It's the most marvellous export service, obviously made, say, during the Emperor Qianlong's period. And I think it's worth quite a lot. I think you'd have to think in terms of somewhere in the order of 7,000 to perhaps 9,000 pounds.
Oh, goodness.
See what I mean?
Yes.
This is the greatest treasure I've seen all day. Very old, beautifully kept. A bit dirty, but so what? It hasn't got any chips, it hasn't got any damage. It's a cracker of an item. Tell me about it.
Well, it just came in a junk box, and I thought at first the top was missing, but I eventually found the top, and that's how it
put
came.
the two back together?
Put the two back together.
Did you know what it was for?
I had no idea it was for snuff.
Well, it is for snuff. It's made of wood. It comes under the field called treen. Anything made out of wood is called treen in the collector's
I
trade.
see, yeah.
And people have become wildly excited about shoes. Now, shoes are always collectible, but particularly when they're made of wood like this. And what we've got here is a little Georgian shoe and endless decoration around the side.
Nice.
Somebody has taken such
That's
a lot
right.
of trouble on this. I think if you were to go home and give this a bit of care and attention, a bit
Clean
of a
it.
brush up with just some gentle wax, it would start to glow and shine,
That's
it would
right.
start to look like metal, and I think if this was then to appear in an auction room, you could expect anything, £600–700.
Never.
Yeah,
Oh.
absolutely. I mean, you've got a real treasure here. It's terribly
Wow.
exciting.
It's one of those Victorian pieces, unmistakably Victorian because there's such a mixture, that comes from a period of the Italianate Renaissance. Now, it looks as if it could have been made in Italy, but it wasn't. It's an English-made piece. And it would date from about 1880, maybe 1875, up to about 1890, 1895. That's when it was made, as far as the structure's concerned. It depends on if you've got any family history to back that up. I mean, any knowledge on it at all?
Well, it belonged to my grandmother.
Right.
And I inherited it. And it's been in the family about 50 years now.
Well, it was obviously made long time before that. I think it's worth looking at the amazing detail and also the contrasting colours that you've got with this boxwood and ivory. And I'm going to open this drawer. You see that shadow?
Yeah.
It's almost black, that rosewood. Imagine that when the boxwood itself was bright gold, the ivory was white. I mean, it must have absolutely stunning with these Sheffield plate handles. They're not silver, you can just see the nickel coming through.
Oh.
You've then got a carved frieze of the finest quality, really deep cutting, and it's solid rosewood. And then if you come up to the upper part, you've got these nice sort of places here to stand a pair of vases or figures.
Yeah.
Amazing quality, and the thing I've never seen before, is this carving which is inlaid into a lighter background.
Oh, yeah.
So this is actually 2 separate types of timber. Now, there is one thing about this that does make it stand out, different from the majority of these museum or exhibition pieces which were made from the 1850s, 1860s onwards. And that is the name of the maker. And here you've got, just faintly stamped in there, Gillow & Co.
Gillow, yeah.
Now, Gillow's was one of the oldest firms that we can trace back to the 1690s.
Really? Yeah.
And they were one of the few English makers who actually stamped their wares. I think the Gillow family actually eased out of the company by the sort of 1830s. And by the end of the century, of course, it was wearing a Gillow.
Oh, yeah.
Famous company.
Those, yeah.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that was the same people.
Oh, was it?
Now, the Gillow stamp makes a lot of difference. So now we come down to the big question. Have you got it insured at all?
No, only on the house insurance.
Right. Well, you need to improve that because without the Gillow stamp, you're looking at several £1,000s.
Oh?
With that Gillow stamp and the condition that it's in, which is extremely good, then you ought to insure this between 10 and 12,000.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
It's very surprising, that, yeah.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of cabinet.
Very, very good Paris retailer and maker at the time. Date-wise, we were talking about 1865 on this, quite an early clock. And I'm very taken with this little one, a miniature. Again, French, rather later than the clock we've just been looking at. And this one is signed with a factory stamp of Henri Jacquot. He was a very good quality maker indeed. His clocks are all individually numbered. Date on this one, probably realistically, round about the turn of the century. Both very pretty clocks by very good makers. And price-wise, any thoughts on that at all or not?
No, I don't know what the value is.
None at all? No? Well, an early Grand Sonnery like this could retail for probably in the region of £2,600, £2,800.
Really?
And the little Jacquot, rather more reasonable, but still would be costing about £850 to £900, particularly with a box and key. So two lovely clocks, and I'm really glad to see that they're wound up and that you use them regularly.
Well, it started about 28 years ago, and I just saw one little piece in a shop window and liked it, so I've been collecting it ever since.
Have you ever been to Ireland?
No, never.
You have no Irish connections whatsoever?
None whatsoever, no.
Well, I think anybody in Ireland would have been very proud to have a collection like this, because what we have here is a fantastic array of pieces of bog oak. This is basically wood that has remained water-laden for many, many, many centuries. Some of it is medieval, some of it's earlier than that. And it's incredibly hard to carve. It's like trying to carve metal. To me, this sort of little touching name on here is perhaps a gift from a young man to his sweetheart. Perhaps he was going away to search for work in America. Perhaps he might not see her again for forever. And yet he gave her a little brooch before he left.
I particularly like the brooches because they're named, but unusual names, which I've never heard of before. But I love the scenes on the boxes.
The little scenes on the boxes.
Yeah.
Of course, what we've got on these two little boxes are almost identical scenes. In fact, they are identical. We've got church windows, these great big wonderful sweeping Gothic church windows here, and then underneath the name of the place, Muck Ross. Which is the most recent piece you've bought?
The harp.
The harp.
Yes.
And what did you pay for that?
£50.
£50. So definitely, bog oak is a market in which you should be. Some of these pieces are going to be worth £15, £20. So if you take the whole collection, including, and I haven't seen the pieces you've got at home, obviously, but I think your collection is going to be worth upwards of £1,000.
Thank you.
This is a wonderful object. Where did you find it?
We found it in a disused cellar.
In a disused cellar?
Yes, in a hotel that we took over.
Abandoned?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, the best thing about it, of course, is when you turn it round, because it's an urn with a difference. It's not only a lighthouse, it's the Eddystone Lighthouse.
Yes.
And it advertises OXO.
The OXO, yes, that's right.
It did originally light up.
Yes.
And beneath it you could put a heater, which would of course keep the OXO ticking over.
Yes, yes.
Because of course there's no connection between OXO and Eddystone Lighthouse at all.
No,
it's absolute fantasy. I mean seriously, it is actually made, it is a known advertising model. A collector would really pay quite a lot for this. I would think £300, something like that. Yes. It's a great piece.
Well, the moment I saw the box I thought, something interesting here, and indeed it is, because in it is untouched, a doll's house furniture, whole set, absolutely in pristine condition, and all made of chicken wishbones. For instance, for the armchair, you've got a double one there. And what's so lovely is it's obviously a very expensive piece in its day, because it's lined, it's in its box, a lot of work has gone into it. And it's also got a silk satin upholstery.
Is it
you've
so?
noticed? Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I've never liked to take it out. I'm glad I didn't now.
No.
It's not having a doll's house to put it in.
Well, inevitably, if you had, we would have lost cushions and little chairs.
Yeah, exactly.
And in that condition, if it were to go up for auction, we'd be talking around 150 to 200 pounds.
Thank you very much.
Keep it even in better condition than before.
That tiny set of doll's house furniture contrasts absolutely with the grand scale of Luton Hoo. There's a host of fine things to see in the house. Carpets, tapestries, mirrors, fine furniture, pottery, porcelain, and magnificent sculpture too. Literally everywhere you look, there's something of interest. The English gallery at the top of the main staircase is literally packed with fine things of the 18th and 19th centuries. Here, for instance, a portrait by Reynolds. Over there, one by Rumney. On this wall here, a couple of Hopners, just above a Chippendale three-seater settee. And here, one of the finest pieces, I think, in the whole house. A quite remarkable globe bureau made by the firm of Morgan and Sanders in 1812. And the interesting thing about that company is that they were responsible for fitting out Nelson's cabin on HMS Victory. And this piece combines both ingenuity with great quality craftsmanship, and we're lucky indeed when we find things like that on the Antiques Roadshow. But we do have our moments. You know, one of the really nice things about the Antiques Roadshow is that every week you see something new, and this is the first time that I've seen what are called ship's chairs.
Isn't that extraordinary?
Now, what was the object of having cane on one side and then a padded leather seat on the other?
Well, the cane on the one side was when you went into very hot climates, and the leather is for when you're in cooler climates. And also that you can see the bottom there where they screw onto the floor.
And they're made, incidentally, of oak, I'm told.
Yes, isn't that strange? Because looking at them, they look more like mahogany, don't
Yes,
they?
and you would expect with this sort of style of chair to be mahogany,
yes,
more in keeping.
You would.
And how much did you pay for them, may I ask?
I bought them about 14 years ago, and I paid £25 each for them.
And you don't think you paid too much for them?
Well, I hope I haven't lost anyway.
Well, I don't think you have. I'm glad you're sitting down.
Are you?
Because I've asked Christopher Payne about them, and he thinks that today at auction they would fetch between £2,000 and £2,500.
What? Really? By jingo, you do surprise me.
It's been handed down from another branch of the family, and it's had its home in Scotland until now. It's been in the family quite a long time, I think.
Right. It is unusual because it's a piece of glass dating from around about 1900, probably made in New York. And it's got this sort of feathered design in a sort of iridescent peacock blue, that rather vibrant green, and it's backed, as we can see by looking inside, by this rather vivid, I suppose, tangerine colour. It leaps at you, doesn't it? And the silver is applied using an electrolytic process.
Yeah.
So it actually builds up on the surface when it's submerged in an electrolytic bath. And you leave it in there and let it build up. Obviously, you mask out those areas you don't want to be covered. And if I was to suggest a probable maker, it would be Quiesel. They were based in Brooklyn, in New York. And when it comes to putting a value, it's very difficult when you've not seen an example before. But I'd insure that for the best part of £1,000.
Well, that's jolly interesting.
So you keep it out on the shelf?
Oh, I think so. It's no good in a box, is it?
No.
When did you acquire that one?
That was about 10, 12 years ago. Before,
Right. How much did you pay for it?
About £600.
Right.
Which was quite
Interesting. What I love about this is it's so heavy.
Yes.
But you've got to pick this one up to appreciate it. Condition is fantastic. The engraving of the arms, absolutely crisp as they were engraved.
Yeah.
The maker, of course, here, quite an interesting one for the reign of George III. In fact, with this one, we're into 1807
right.
as the date. William Frisbee.
Yeah.
And, of course, we worked with Paul Storr right at the beginning of his working life. But in fact, actually, Paul Storr was an argumentative so-and-so, and that partnership
they broke up. Oh.
within a year. I mean, such were the arguments. But, boy, what a waste.
Nice, isn't it?
How much did you pay for this set?
That was about a couple of hundred.
Couple of hundred.
Yeah.
Right. It is actually a famous Art Deco design.
Oh, nice. Right.
The designer, Harold Stabler, he designed for a number of different companies. In this case, of course, it's the Goldsmiths Silversmiths Company.
Yeah.
But for anybody wanting to acquire a piece of 1930s English silver, Stabler certainly is one of the people to go for.
Right.
Now, whose are these?
These are mine. My mum and dad bought them for me when I was 1 year old.
Pair of salts, of course. Looking at them sitting there, think straight away about 1690, which is when the originals of these would have been made. But in this case, actually, we've got mid-19th century marks. So they're Victorian copies, but the maker is Robert Garrard.
Yeah.
And of course, there was no point in asking what you paid for them because they were a present. So what about values? Have you thought at all about present-day values?
No, I don't think we enjoy them. I think that's the...
You enjoy. That's the most important thing. Now, I would expect those to sell today for at least £500.
and you should certainly insure them for in excess of £1,000. Now, this one costs you £600.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful example that I could see that easily today going in excess of £1,500 at auction, and would not be in the slightest bit surprised if it sold for over £2,000.
Really? Good Lord.
And the Stabler, now that was £200.
Yes, yeah.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think you can quite easily add another naught to that today.
Right. So that's done better than this has?
Over the last 10 years, Art Deco has become very popular.
The one thing that strikes everyone who visits Luton Hoo is the great number of clocks in the house. The whole place is full of them. But you know, you still need a decent watch, because they all tell different times. French clocks, German clocks, Renaissance clocks, mantel clocks, and so on. Large and small, marble or brass, they all seem well suited to the scale of the room in which they're placed. Last week, Simon Bull talked about some of the clocks here at Luton Hoo. Here he is again, talking this time about a rather nice Queen Anne period marquetry long case clock, which came into our Colchester Roadshow earlier this year.
Well, I suppose if one wanted to be picky in an ideal world, you'd say, wouldn't it be nice if it was 6 or 8 inches smaller?
Very much so, yes. The houses these days are not built to accommodate clocks like this, I regret.
But it's a sort of absolute classic Queen Anne period marquetry, when the houses were taller.
Indeed.
It's the 3 train, of course.
Yes, indeed.
And well, 3, instead of the usual 2 winding holes for hour, strike and time, you've got a 3rd for the quarter strike, which is what, on 6 bells?
6 bells.
Yeah. Elliot's a good 2nd division maker, I think 1700-ish.
Yeah.
And the case may have been French prior to it sometime, but it's all original. And so often you see a clock in the shop and there's not a mark on it. And you wonder to yourself, is it really 400 years old? Yeah. But if we start here, you've got cracks both sides in the marquetry, where obviously the joint is made between the top and the sidebar. And the wood, of course, moves in different directions depending on which way the grain is pointing. And so it's cracked and it's moved out. And exactly the same thing's happened on top of the door. It's actually moved out, and the crack has opened up across there. And you've got the same situation at the bottom of the door.
The crack again.
And then going down the base, which is obviously made of 2 panels of wood, we can see that it's actually cracked straight across the middle, and small bits have come out and have been replaced. And so often, you can see nothing.
It's got a feel-good factor about
exactly.
it. Yes.
Quite valuable. 3 train, I suppose I'd have to say something like approaching £10,000.
Really? Wow. That's quite an impressive. It was bought in auction in 1953 for £101. So
101.
Yes.
Well, somebody's done all right.
Yes, indeed.
These are all Regency, but before that, in the times of the 17th century times, you'd often have small locket compartments that would contain something that looked like tissue paper. And in fact, that was human skin. So with the mourning theme, it was something that went through for literally 300 years, and you'd have all sorts of different things set inside them. And the value for a garnet brooch like that, which was made in about 1795, is probably round about £120. A small one like that, which is just plain gold embossed with flowers, that's only worth around about £40–50. These are rather nice, where you've got this very, very finely plaited hair in a chandelier form. Now, the style of this, with this sort of tapering drop, was made in around about 1795, and it's very, very fine brown hair. And that's one thing that should be said about hair, is that it will not deteriorate as the years go by. It will last for literally hundreds of years. Now, as a collection, it's wonderful to see so many pieces, obviously over a period of 30, 40, 50 years. And as a group, it's more valuable simply because there are so many of them.
My husband was an articled pupil to a firm of auctioneers, and he was asked to make up a set of chairs for an antique dealer. And he managed to find
the beginnings of a terrible story.
The 2 missing links, and it made up a superb set of chairs.
Right.
And the antique dealer was so delighted, he told my husband that he could choose anything from his shop.
Somewhat risky.
Somewhat risky. And to the antique dealer's dismay, my husband chose this vase.
How interesting. What a wonderful story. Why does nobody say that to me? Please come into the shop and choose what you like. Anyway.
Exactly.
Well, they are in fact Japanese, not Chinese.
Japanese, yes.
Yeah, very typical of Japanese cloisonne. They all date from about the same period. These are late 19th century. This one is early 20th century. They're not even very old. I mean, these are barely in proper terms an antique. We've got birds in branches. This is an aventurine ground, this sort of speckly look, named after aventurine quartz.
Yes.
I think you've also been polishing them, haven't you?
I did, yes.
Well, we don't do that. Bit naughty, that one.
They'll soon cloud over again.
Well, they will.
I'm sure.
Honestly, cloisonne, the collectors are neurotically fussy, and they like things to be in the most perfect condition, just like they were made. It actually makes very little difference on this pair of vases, and they're worth somewhere around £400 to £600 for the pair.
For the pair.
For the pair.
Yes.
This one's, as I say, later. It's also finer, much more meticulous work has gone into putting the little silver wires, the cloisons there.
Yes.
Brilliant enamelling. And it's very clever the way they've got this change of colour and tone going all the way down through the bottom. Now, the real point about all this is that this is made by one of the leading cloisonne manufacturers at the beginning of the century, a man called Namikawa Yasuyuki. Namikawa Yasuyuki. And his pad mark is on the bottom here, and it says Kyoto Namikawa on this little silver pad. Yes. He was the only manufacturer to do this form of marking quite like this. Anyway, all that put together, this piece is going to be worth somewhere between £2,500 and £3,500.
Is it really?
Nice little sort of selection, wasn't it, really?
Yes, it was indeed. What a day.
Right.
Thank you.
This, I think, is miscellaneous.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, before my mother and father got married, they bought the house in Stretford, outside Manchester.
Oh, right.
And this was in it, along with other antiques.
Well, I would say that it was made in Manchester, almost certainly.
Would
It's
it?
exactly what one would expect for a big major provincial city in England of about 1880.
Yeah.
Made of mahogany, very nicely made. I just think this is so nice. Even the shelves are nicely detailed. I like the way the glazing's done, very nice indeed. It just is a big, majestic piece of furniture. What do you think it's worth?
I haven't a clue. I really haven't.
I'd have thought it's going to cost you getting on for £3,000 to buy that in an antique shop today.
Is it really? Gracious me.
And the idea is that when you've been presented with it, as your grandfather was made an honorary mandarin, which is an extreme compliment. This is the sort of thing you would give somebody at that stage. It becomes a sort of an official swagger stick. And when you are holding audience, or you're conducting a council or a meeting, or sitting as a judge, you sit with your roué sceptre like this in a position of authority. So it's made out of a terrifically fine piece of jade. With Buddhistic emblems, you've got a lovely Buddhistic endless knot motif there, Buddhistic flower, and all the other ornaments, including the wheel at the bottom. And then the very top of the head of the piece, you've got further Buddhistic emblems underneath the canopy. Now, the jade itself is highly valued, so I'm going to have to think of a reasonable sum to put on it. One thing I will say is that it started off life as a back scratcher. Yes. The roué sceptre was initially a sort of a royal instrument that you sort of go down the back like this with, but I don't think you would do it with a fine piece of jade. Fabulous object. At auction, could fetch between £5,000 and £8,000.
It won't go to auction. It's a family heirloom.
Of course it is.
Judging by the tremendous response we've received from you at home in recent years, our Antiques Roadshow competitions have been very popular. So I can't think of a better place to introduce this year's competition than here in the garden at Luton Hoo. The subject of wine can be rewarding in a number of ways. Drinking it, of course, the cultivation of the vine, and the collecting of wine-associated antiques. And it's those collector's items that are the subject of this year's competition. Of all things associated with the enjoyment of wine, among the most elegant, I always think, are wine coolers, John, and these are two particularly good examples.
Yes, they are. Both slightly different, as you can see in appearance and usage,
but basically for serving wine, cold or chilled, which was something that was done in England in as early as the 17th century. These were both from the mid-18th century, 1750, 1760. This one, as you can see, an open tub, purely for serving it cold. This one, however, has a lid and a lock, and believe it or not, we'll actually take a bottle standing up inside. Also has a metal liner, so you can put ice in that as well, but when you weren't using it for that, you weren't serving, you weren't in the dining room, you could lock it in, close the lid, lock it in, and it kept it perfectly safe as well.
So they're both known as wine coolers.
But this one has a specific and descriptive title.
And that is the subject of our first question. What is the specific name given to that wine cooler? The second part of our competition next week, question 3, and more details of how to enter the week after that. Oh, and the prize is well worth winning. A weekend for 2 in Dublin, plus £2,500 to spend on antiques of your choice in the company of one of our roadshow experts to help and advise you. Also, there are 3 runner-up prizes of £500 and that same Dublin weekend. So, well worth having a go.
I was born on my great-grandmother's birthday, so my mother gave it to me when my great-grandmother died.
Well, I must say I'm rather impressed by this watercolour. In my opinion, it's definitely by one of Queen Victoria's greatest seascape painters, Clarkson Stanfield. He was born in 1795, and he was an extremely important scene painter. Before he was press-ganged into the Navy, aged 19, he stayed at sea for really quite a long time before he managed to escape through injury and went to London and painted in the 1820s, exhibited in the 1820s at the Royal Academy, and in fact became the most important theatrical scene painter in England at the time. And with this history and knowledge of the sea, and with the influence of people like Turner, who also loved the sea, he became this extraordinary painter. And this is an exquisite English watercolour. I mean, very, very fine painting. I mean, can you imagine being up here in the rigging during this firefight, as it were, where presumably this English ship is breaking through a barricade of 2 French ships. It's not often we see such fine quality watercolours by the best artists. It has suffered a bit. Yes. I mean, was it, you reglazed it or what? Because there's been quite a lot of suffering up here.
I don't remember anything. I just remember it hanging above the piano, and really nothing's been done to it at all.
Well, at some stage, I think somehow it's got too close to the glass and it has suffered here. This is damp. But it would be well worth restoring and touching in. I would say somewhere around £3,000 to £5,000.
Wow.
Well, this is a wonderful scratch-built locomotive. Who built it?
My husband.
Your husband?
My late husband,
Right,
yes.
and there's a plaque here. It says built 1956 to 1960.
That's right, it took 4 years.
It's a beautiful piece. It really is well made, exquisite. It's a 3.5-inch gauge, and it's a 1/16th model.
I see.
It's based on Nigel Gresley First Pacific class locomotive, and the detail is tremendous. It's accurate in virtually every single aspect.
Lovely.
You can see inside here the beautiful detail of the controls.
Yes.
Does it have a boiler certificate?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment.
But it has had.
You need to get a boiler certificate for it because it makes it more valuable. And in fact, have you ever had it valued? You haven't. Well, I think today something like this would probably be worth in the region of between £3,000 and £5,000.
Oh, very nice.
Yes. It's a wonderful, wonderful object.
How did you come? Did you buy it?
No, my auntie gave it to me.
Yes?
Yes.
Well, that's a jolly nice present. And so, have you any idea about it at all?
No, only that it's Cartier.
Right. Well, it certainly is Cartier. It's signed on the dial, and it's called a lapel watch or a fob watch. Used to be worn there like that. And it's really a sophisticated and beautiful piece of jewellery in typical deco taste, made in the 1920s or 1930s, with natural pearls, diamonds, rose diamonds. Jewellery of this period is in enormous demand, and especially anything by Cartier. And I would say that if you went to replace this in a good West End shop, I should think it would probably be costing somewhere between £10,000 and £15,000.
high values like that one at Truro are not all that common at roadshows and normally only apply to single items. Building up a great collection such as that of the Wernher family at Luton Hoo is impossible without the backing of a considerable fortune. These rooms at the front of the house are devoted to the most fabulous collection of English porcelains. The collection was formed by Sir Julius Wernher's wife, Lady Ludlow, and this particular room is devoted to Bow and Chelsea. Even a casual glance shows that Lady Ludlow, in common with many other collectors in the 1920s, liked the most colourful and highly decorated pieces from the Chelsea factory in particular. By far the biggest single factory represented here is Worcester. In fact, Worcester porcelains fill the whole of this room. You know, you could lock Henry Sandon in here for a week and he wouldn't even try to escape. Worcester porcelain often turns up at roadshows, but just lately we've been privileged to see some things that wouldn't have been out of place here at Luton Hoo. I know that Hugo Morley-Fletcher would probably agree.
Now, most Worcester porcelain was decorated at the factory, but this particular group was actually decorated in London by a decorator called James Giles, who bought in porcelains from other factories and decorated them himself. And he was a particularly good decorator, and you could see his skill to great advantage inside this cup. I think there's the most delightful detail here. There's little blue enamel spray, and then the swags in turquoise and black, and in beautifully chiseled gilding. How did you come by it?
It was, my grandfather was a collector, and it was handed down first to my mother, and then when she died, to myself, my brother. Some of it is also with my aunts as well, so it was divided up. So.
Well, it is a really exceptionally interesting group. Very valuable, these are. And I would think that's worth £1,200 to £1,500. That, even with the repair, is worth probably £500. That's worth another £500 to £700. And a collector would love to have that saucer or no saucer because it's so beautiful, and the inside is really superb. So you're probably going to still get £300 for those two. But this is lovely. I mean, I'm really most excited to see this because it is, one, beautifully decorated, and it is in superb condition.
Such a pretty dial. It's known as a Butterfield dial because most of these small octagonal dials were made by a gentleman called Butterfield, but this one is made by Sévin, and there's the name on the bottom. And also, what you always find on these dials are the names of the cities that people would most often have visited. What is exquisite about these dials are the detail. For instance, on this gnomon here, there's a little bird which indicates with its beak the different
latitudes.
The latitudes, yes. And the plumage on the birds, beautifully chased. Now, where did it come from?
Well, my husband bought that one.
Yes.
Because he was an antiquarian horologist, and he collected dials.
Yes, it's very, very nice. That would have a value of between perhaps £600 and £800. There's only one thing that concerns me. Have you cleaned it?
Yes.
Do you think that was the right thing to do?
Well, it was in such a disgusting state.
Was it? If you can resist cleaning it for the next 150 years, you might...
And even if it's almost black,
it's actually...
leave it.
I would always recommend to leave it. Because, of course, every time you clean, you're taking a minute layer off.
Yes.
How long's it been in the family?
Only 8 years.
And how did it get to you?
They're a gift.
Fantastic. What a wonderful gift.
Yes.
Well, not only have you got a splendid vase, you've got the stand that seems to have been made for it originally.
Two.
There are two. And the other one has its own table as well.
Exactly the same.
Painting of this quality is associated with Vienna in particular, and they were obviously intended to really show themselves off, because all you have to do is rotate the vase on its own spindle, and we're taken through the scene of classical gods arguing in preparation for the Trojan War. And they are fantastically well painted. Yes. And then the ground colour has been filled in with this wonderful matte gilding, which has then been enhanced with wonderful Rococo scrolls in between. I mean, to produce something like this would take many firings, maybe 10 firings at least. And the painter has actually signed his name down in the bottom here, Fall, and his work occurs on some of the famous Vienna plaques that one gets, and some of the dishes as well. Now, a pair of these would sell in today's market for somewhere between 12 and 18,000 pounds. Good. Which is not bad for a gift, is it?
No, it's not bad for a gift at all. It's very nice indeed.
That beautiful vase brought to our Shropshire Roadshow would certainly not be out of place at Luton Hoo, although it isn't the sort of thing that you'd find in the last room we're going to see. In the Queen's bedroom, your eye is immediately taken by the quality of the furniture, and in particular the bedroom suite itself, made in this beautiful painted satinwood. Bedside cabinets, dressing table, washstand, chairs. In the Adam style, all of this was made by Holland & Son and exhibited at the Paris Exhibition of Modern Art in 1878. And who wouldn't have the most restful time surrounded by furniture of this quality? Who indeed? Well, no less than senior members of our own royal family. And it's known as the Queen's bedroom for a very good reason. Both the Queen and Prince Philip were great friends of the Wernher family, and they used to come here to Luton Hoo to celebrate their wedding anniversaries. The first in 1948, and they continued coming here until 1977, when Lady Zia died. Portraits of Lady Zia and other members of the Wernher family feature prominently in the house, still keeping a watchful eye on their impressive collections. In contrast, there couldn't be a more obvious difference between the rooms at Luton Hoo and the humble interior depicted in a small painting that was brought into our Colchester Roadshow.
One of the particular things I absolutely love about this painting is that it's by an artist, William Snape, who, quite frankly, is not very well known. And the picture, though, is so very, very good. Wonderful detail in it. Has it been hanging on your walls for a long time?
15 to 18 years, I'd say.
I particularly like the treatment on the back of the door where the lights come through and the paintwork's lifting off the wood. And here again we've got a good bit of flaking. Here, I think, had you ever thought what they might be?
No, I hadn't. I thought they might be mouse traps or rat traps or something. Yeah.
And possibly looking at the size of the cat, which is kind of well fed and well looked after, perhaps he wasn't capable of doing the job which the traps would do. It looks particularly comfortable. And of course, the man there preparing wood for a fire, is that what you thought?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, and as I said at the beginning, for somebody who's not very well known, it's wonderful to come across a picture which is, you know, so colourful and so interesting in all the detail it represents. But I think with it cleaned, and I think it could be gently and should be gently cleaned, that it'd probably be worth between £3,000 and £5,000.
Really?
That's a guess.
But these things are a bit older than him, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
I weren't. Are they yours or?
No, I've actually brought them for a friend.
Yes, they really are quite wonderful things. They're virtually all Worcester, I suppose. This teapot is absolutely splendid, isn't it? I see it's marked under the bed. Someone has had a stab at putting Loudon's Bristol, which in fact it isn't. At one time everybody used to think these very early Worcester pieces were made at Bristol, but this one is undoubtedly an early Worcester one. A wonderful shade, I mean a beautiful shade, and with these wonderful panels with these strange little chinoiserie characters on them, looking Chinese, but of course they're Worcester people really, pretending to be Chinese. I think they're marvellous. Made around about 1753 or 4, and this little can, this is for drinking coffee, a lovely little coffee can, again made in Worcester, although here again someone has had a stab at putting Bristol decorated under the glaze, they note there. For a long time these things were thought to be Bristol, but we now know that they were actually produced at Worcester. I found them in the excavations when I did excavations on the original factory site. Absolute proof. This particular shape is what's called the scratch cross family shape, where the base comes out at the bottom like that. And if one looks very carefully, I think there is a scratch mark in there in its normal place, usually opposite the handle. We don't know what it was for, but it's a very Worcester characteristic, not found on any Bristol pieces. The Bristol factory finished in 1752, and so far as one knows at present, they would never have made that particular shape, nor would they have made these gorgeous little coffee cups. They're beautiful shapes, lovely little eight-sided shapes, aren't they? And they're gorgeous. This one again says soft paste Bristol, which is quite wrong. As far as one knows, Bristol never made any enamelled decoration. They've only made blue and white. So that's positively Worcester, as all these coffee cups are. And this one is the most spectacular of the lot, I suppose. This is a pattern called the Hope Edwards pattern, with these cornucopias of claret with fine gilding and usually painted with sliced fruit. Very typical of the work of James Giles in London. The interesting thing about it, it comes from a great collection called the Rouse Lynch Collection. I knew the owner of that, Tom Byrne, until he died some years ago. He had a marvellous collection of what he always thought was mainly Worcester. And in fact, this does say Worcester. But looking at it very carefully, the shape is not a Worcester shape, but more like the Calfley factory shape in Shropshire. Not too far from here, of course, across the river from Coalport. And the shape of foot is very typically a U-shaped section. If it were Worcester, it would be a triangular section, a V-shaped section. So that is now a Calfley milk jug decorated in London by Giles, which is terribly unusual. I suppose one's looking there. Well, I suppose nearly all these pieces are well into 4 figures each. I mean, the milk jug, let's have a stab at about sort of £4,000 or something like that. The little coffee cups, I mean, one can reckon on £1,000 happily a piece for them. And the teapot, which is, I think, the gem of the whole collection, I don't know, 4,000. So, if you persuade your friend to let you have them for the boy, he's going to be a very happy chap when he grows up.
When I was a baby, my parents put me in one of these. Not quite as nice as this one, but this model, this Victorian mahogany swinging crib, absolutely lovely. And it's got its original upholstery inside. Yes. Which mine didn't have. I remember, because I could see through. I should also tell you that, of course, being a dealer, my father sold it as soon as I grew out of mine. So is this a family one?
Yes. Came down the line to my daughter. My daughter was overseas at the time, so I'm looking after it for her.
Oh, right. The model was actually illustrated in several pattern books from the 1860s. So that's really when it would date from. You establish that by the pattern of the turning here, which does give it that Victorian feel, and also the sort of standard or cheval ends. But it's such lovely condition. All the basket work that one can see is absolutely perfect. And of course that end with its sort of Gothic shaped hood to it is absolutely stunning. And look here, you even got this lovely shaped bracket here with its original gilding on. Very important, very nice to see. So many of them, because they're fragile, have been damaged over the years, and therefore to find one complete is really quite rare. You really should have it covered, even temporarily in the household insurance policy, for £2,500.
Yes, thank you.
All right?
Yes, thank you very much.
Absolutely lovely.
Yes.
Quite strong memories for me.
Well, I very much hope you've enjoyed this second visit to Luton Hoo as much as we have, and of course the opportunity to see moments from previous Antiques Roadshows in this series that otherwise we might not have been able to show you purely for reasons of time. We're off now to Scotland, to the capital of the Highlands. I very much hope that you'll join us at the same time next week. Until then, from all of us here at Luton Hoo, goodbye.